Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
And here's the twist.
Put your hands together for senior economics reporter, Courtney Brown.
All right, good morning. I did not trip coming up here, so we're off to a good start. Thank you all for being here bright and early, though I'm sure everyone has been here up for hours, right? You've all been up for hours. It's not early anymore. Our event today is the Biotech Race, Advancing U.S. Innovation, really important conversations we have on deck. As the voice of God said, I'm Courtney Brown, senior economics reporter at Axios. I'm here with Peter Sullivan, who is our healthcare expert, healthcare reporter, and we're gonna be moderating a series of conversations with people at the forefront of biotech change. I wanna say a quick thank you to our sponsor for making this event possible this morning, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. And with that, I think we should get started. Our first speaker is the chief scientist at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. He leads the organization's global research strategy to develop new therapies that improve the lives of patients with Parkinson's. Please join me in welcoming Mark Frasier to the stage. Okay, so let's set the stage a little bit. Michael J. Fox Foundation has funded more than $2.5 billion in Parkinson's research. So that outspends the federal government by like 2 to 1, almost 2 to 1, thereabouts. And you are very focused on what breakthrough science actually means for patients, the people waiting on it. And from my understanding, your capacity working with Michael J. Fox, who I'm sure we all know, he's kind of the face and the North Star of the foundation, but the scientific direction is left to you and the team. Is that all fair?
I think it's fair, but I also would remind everyone that Michael is a patient himself.
Of course.
And so one of his priorities is to bring the patient voice into shaping research priorities. So certainly we and our team and hundreds of advisors around the world are setting the agenda. But it's really important, and one of our value adds is to bring that patient voice into what matters to them, what's meaningful to them, what's going to be impactful for them.
This is exactly why we wanted you here today, for that patient perspective. So here's the big question. We're talking about what winning in biotech means. There are a bunch of different angles we can go, but I want to ask you, what does that mean for patients? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it means that we're developing treatments that are meaningful to them. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean we can develop treatments to address certain symptoms, but not all symptoms might impact their lives in the way that we think they might. And so bringing the patient voice and having a seat at the table to shaping the research priorities, telling biotech and pharma what matters to them is really critical. And so having that input at the start is going to shape and set winning treatments. And we've seen a lot of progress so far that we've developed. The foundation has funded projects that actually have resulted in drug approvals that have had really impactful ways on their quality of life. So I think winning is bringing the patient voice into setting the research priorities, getting their input on setting clinical trial protocols, getting their input on what is feasible for them, what's doable, what they prefer to do, and then ultimately getting their input on what's impactful. How do these drugs impact their day-to-day quality of life?
When we were talking last week, I raised a really silly example, and I'll raise it here with a couple of our close friends, which is that when I go to the doctor's office, I know there's all these innovations and advancements, but they hand me a clipboard with like a bunch of paper to fill out with a pen.
Yeah.
And you said that actually this silly example that I thought was kind of funny is maybe a good way to think about this tension between innovation and patient-first care.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example of that, where we've seen tech companies develop very sophisticated ways of measuring movement or tremor, symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's disease. But there's no input from the patient. So there's smartphones and smartwatches and applications that may be able to do finger tapping and detect very sensitive changes in walking. But when you ask the person living with Parkinson's, there's no connection between how those measurements actually connect to whether they can work longer, whether they can watch their grandkids, whether they can help their kids. And so bringing that patient voice early in the development process, in the life cycle, I think will inform the measurements that matter to patients. Measure what matters, not just measure what you can measure with innovative cutting-edge technologies. And so marrying those two, of the innovation and the technology with the voice of the patient, I think will result in faster, more efficient outcomes and more impactful outcomes.
Okay, how do we do that?
Well, like I said, I think we ask people with Parkinson's. So one of the things that we do is bring people with Parkinson's to the table, ask them, and collect data and publish reports on what matters to them. Very often, we connect pharma groups that are designing clinical trials with people living with Parkinson's to be on their advisory boards, to tell the pharma groups, the trial sponsors, what matters to them, what they can and can't do. Would they do a lumbar puncture? Would they do multiple lumbar punctures? Would they wear a bulky watch that looks terrible 24 hours a day? These are very practical, sensical questions, but it's remarkable how, without that, bringing that patient voice, how often it's overlooked.
When we talk about innovation, and this is not just in biotech or healthcare, I think more broadly, the conversation is about more capital, more AI lately, and faster timelines. Now, in the context of the work that you do at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, a lot of the work that you do, it's taken a decade or more, right, to validate. I guess, how do you understand that tension between speed that actually helps patients and speed potentially risking distorting what real progress requires?
I think when we talk about innovation, there's certainly cutting-edge technologies, and the Parkinson's pipeline of therapeutics is robust in its diversity and immunotherapy approaches and gene therapy approaches. So there's innovation in the science and technology, but there's also innovation in models of bringing people together. And one of the things that we do at the foundation to speed that progress that you asked about is bringing biotech, pharma, academics together to problem solve. And we have several public-private partnerships where groups that really are competitors are collaborating in a pre-competitive way for things like measurement tools, biomarkers, that are the tides that lift all boats. And so by having this sort of neutral convener role, the foundation is at the nexus of innovation, patient voice, but also bringing people together and convening. And that we've seen has accelerated progress and actually has overcome specific scientific challenges that have faced the field when bringing these groups together.
What makes you optimistic about U.S. innovation in biotech? What are the things that you've been seeing in the last year or so that make you optimistic?
I mean, in the neuroscience field and neurodegeneration, what's really exciting is the opportunity to detect these diseases based on the biology and not on the symptoms. So not just measuring tremor or slowness, but we actually are developing tests that measure Parkinson's biology and in fact can detect this earlier and even before symptoms emerge. This is happening in Alzheimer's as well. There's blood tests that can predict Alzheimer's disease. So the notion that there could be a panel of laboratory tests at an annual physical that predict your likelihood of developing some of these age-related diseases is really exciting. We're seeing a lot of innovation in the diagnostic space. But excitingly, that's coupled with these therapeutics that are being developed and are in clinical trials that we think could be disease modifying and slow or stop the progression of the disease. So we're seeing this convergence of the measurements and diagnostics with the therapeutics that is the most innovative we've ever seen. And we're just trying to make it happen faster and deliver it to patients quicker.
You know what I didn't hear you mention just now? Anything about AI. Is there how quickly AI is getting better? Does that make you optimistic? Maybe it makes you pessimistic.
No. It's definitely received a lot of attention, and from my point of view, it's a really powerful tool. And in biomedical science, the tools are emerging slowly and probably more rapidly over time to interrogate multiple different types of data and make inferences on patterns of data that are very complex. I think the challenge is that translational component. We have funded AI before it was called AI, and it was machine learning and data science. And so there are models out there. I think what we've been focused on is making sure the data are of high quality for these AI models, and that translation of the sort of AI finding to how that matters to patients. Right now, they're sort of academic observations, and quickly, I think they will become translated into impact for patients.
We're going to be talking to the co-founder of Moderna in a few minutes here. He's made a really, what I think is a compelling case for why America needs to be first in biotech, needs to really be leading innovation. But I wonder, from the perspective of a patient, a Parkinson's patient, does it matter where the cure comes from, here or elsewhere?
So we fund research all over the world. Mm-hmm. And from a patient perspective and an organization perspective, we're agnostic to where that research is done.
Interesting.
It's really important to fund the best science and the most innovative science that will impact patients. So we are agnostic to where that work is done. I will say that investment in U.S. infrastructure is critical, and we are seeing a shift towards more funding outside of the U.S. And so it's really important to us to fund the best science. And like I said, we're agnostic, but it's important, for me personally, it's important to have that in the U.S.
With that in mind, that the patient might be a little bit agnostic about where exactly a cure comes from. Are we thinking about this question of competitiveness in the wrong way? Is it less about US versus China and more about, I don't know, something else?
Well, I think for me and for putting the patient hat on, I think it's really about access.
Yeah.
And would innovations that happen outside the US be accessible, reimbursable, and available to everyone living with Parkinson's? Parkinson's is a global disease, and we fund research around the world to understand the differences in different populations. But having the access to those innovative treatments is really important.
We just have 90 seconds here, and I guess I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about shrinking. Our event head honcho, Julie Bogan, was telling me backstage about how much she loves the show and how perhaps it has brought more visibility to Parkinson's. Do we have anyone here who watches Shrinking? Oh, right here. I understand Michael J. Fox has made a few guest appearances. Talk a little bit about what the show has done for the visibility of the disease.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, Harrison Ford plays someone living with Parkinson's, and Michael has, as you mentioned, has a cameo in season 3. And anytime Michael is on the stage in TV or movies, it raises awareness about Parkinson's disease. And certainly Shrinking is a great example. We've seen a lot. I can't tell you how many personal texts I've gotten from friends and family members about it. And it's really, Parkinson's, as I said, is a global disease. It's the fastest growing neurological disease in the world. It's an $82 billion economic burden in the US. This is a major problem, and so the more awareness we can bring to Parkinson's disease, the better. And Michael has certainly been the face of Parkinson's for over 20 years, and that awareness really increases research funding, it increases trial participation, and awareness about the challenges of people living with Parkinson's. So it's really important.
My favorite Michael J. Fox cameo in recent years was the one he did on Curb Your Enthusiasm when him and Larry David are just going at it, and it's just terrific to watch if anyone hasn't seen it.
It's one of my
funny.
favorites too. I would recommend it.
All right, Mark Frasier, thank you so much for joining Axios. Stay tuned. Our Axios' Chief Operating Officer, Allison Murphy, is coming up with our next big guest.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
It starts with a symptom, an unexpected test result, a diagnosis that changes everything.
It starts with a science teacher, a family member who gets sick, a stubborn determination to know why.
Then come the twists and turns,
The optimism and the setbacks.
the waiting and the sprint to action.
This is American Biotech.
Patients and families,
Scientists and entrepreneurs
refusing defeat
defying the odds.
and relentlessly driven by the belief that there will be more laughter,
That there will be more answers.
that there will be more time. Because this is the fight of our lives.
And losing is not an option.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios Chief Operating Officer, Allison Murphy.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison Murphy, Chief Operating Officer at Axios. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited now for a conversation with someone who leads the world's largest biotechnology trade association, representing companies that are at the forefront of medical innovation. He's a longtime advocate for patients and breakthrough therapies, and he brings both industry leadership and, as you'll hear, a unique personal perspective to this conversation. So please join me in welcoming Biotechnology Innovation Organization President and CEO, John Crowley.
Great. Allison, good morning again.
Great to have you here.
Good morning.
So first, thank you for sharing that really moving
Yeah, wasn't that
introduction.
so well done? We'll talk more about it, but a shout out to Sarah Alsbach, our Chief Communications Officer, the team at Bio Narrative Strategies. Incredibly well done.
And of course, we just heard about the importance of patient perspective, which is hit on there. So tell us, you're launching Bio's new campaign, which is Fight of Our Lives, at a moment when biotech breakthroughs are accelerating rapidly. What is it that we need the public to understand about this particular moment?
It really is a moment as you frame it, Allison. When you think about it, we are in the midst of the most exciting revolution in science and medicine in human history. We've talked for years about being on the cusp of the golden age of medicine. We are in the golden age of medicine. When you think about the advancements that Mark just talked about in Parkinson's, specifically in neuroscience broadly, in genetic medicine, in rare diseases, the progress that we've made over the last half century, largely through medicines and biotechnology and cancer, is incredibly exciting. And now you layer in AI and the good that it can do to alleviate an enormous amount of human suffering, to extend and enhance life. This is what makes it such an exciting period of time. So with all of that excitement and having finally the capabilities, the technologies to, for the betterment of so many people, everybody in the world, we're running up against headwinds that are almost entirely man-made, which is the bad news. The good news is, if they're man-made problems, we can come up with man-made and woman-made solutions to these problems as well. That's why we're at a crossroads. It really is an inflection point for our society. to determine what do we value and what priorities are we going to advance in the field of biomedical research, in science, in medicines, in biotechnology.
I love that, to think that the solutions are in our hands, as equally as any challenges.
Yes.
Now, your own story, which I've now looked into as well, is very tied to the power of biomedical innovation and what that can mean for families who are facing serious diseases. How has that experience shaped the way you think about the stakes of this campaign and the future of biotech?
Allison, our family's journey into the world of science and medicine began more than a quarter of a century ago when our two youngest children were diagnosed with a rare form of muscular dystrophy. And it's what led me to found a small biotechnology company to develop a medicine that could at least stop and hopefully reverse the progress of their disease. And through all the trials and travails of that, we realized that our family was one of countless families, not just in the rare diseases, but more broadly facing a health challenge where in one meeting, in one instant, life changes. And for us, for our family, it kind of hit us and we thought, well, wait a second, this happens to other people. It doesn't happen, not supposed to happen to us. We also realized early on that nature is not cruel, it's just brutally random. And with that, oftentimes the problem begins with a patient, somebody diagnosed with a disease, a parent, a child of somebody with a Parkinson's or an Alzheimer's, finding researchers, as Michael J. Fox did years ago, building a community. And, with those words, we have a problem. And then some scientists somewhere, most often in academics, in our great university systems, at the NIH, saying, we have an idea. And that's the core of science and medicine. We realize that with all these advancements that we've had over the last half a century or more in biotechnology, what's on the horizon today, it comes back to that individual, that family in need. And the hope that they look for is most often hope that's been worked on for years in our universities. Platform technologies, new ideas, new medicines. And when we think about medicines today, where do they come from? Well, more than half, up to 70% of all new medicines originated in America's biotechnology companies. And those companies are almost always started by a scientist out of a university, an entrepreneur, an angel investor, a venture capitalist, people putting their capital at risk. And that's the unique magic of American biotechnology, that we are 50 years in, celebrating the founding of our very first biotechnology company, Genentech, in April of 1976. And again, now we have to think about what does the next 50 years look like. Yeah. So yes, for our family, very personal, but ultimately it's personal for everybody. And as Sarah and I and the team were thinking about this campaign, I challenged them to come up with a campaign, and this is the foundation of it, the video we just saw, but it's going to have so many different offshoots to it and so many stories to tell. I encourage them to make a video that humanizes who we are, what we do, why we do it, and for whom we do it. And I think this captures it so incredibly well, and evoke emotion, yeah, and evoke a response where people feel compelled to do something, to do some action, whatever it may be. And that's a good part of what we try to do at Bio, in advancing really good policies that will drive more science, more medicine, more innovation. Also make sure that everybody has access, so innovation and access together, so that everybody has access to every medicine. And to bring in a sense of urgency, that we have to do this as absolutely quickly as possible.
So you talk about that sense of urgency,
yeah,
and as you mentioned, 50th anniversary of American biotech. When you think about all of these personal stories, we also know that policy is a part of influencing the direction those stories may take. So what are the biggest policy obstacles and opportunities here on this 50th anniversary and as we look at the next 50 years?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned opportunities, because there are many. But as you also indicate, there are challenges. And again, our job is to advance policies, ideas, and to work with lawmakers, policymakers, to make sure we stop bad ideas that may be well-intended at certain problems, but also to advance this entire ecosystem, what we call this virtuous circle of innovation. everything and everyone that it takes to make newer and better medicines. So when we think about some of the policy, what are the problems that we're trying to solve for? One problem is not just the research and the great ideas and the science that has to take place, it's also the science and technology that has to go into the manufacturing of our medicines. Sometimes in areas like cell and gene therapy, the manufacturing process is the science, is the product. And we're increasingly losing control of that. We've lost control of the supply chain, as we saw during COVID, for some of our most basic medicines, our anesthetics, our antibiotics. But increasingly, too, we're losing to China and to others, the preeminence of manufacturing. So when we look at solving a problem like, why don't we make as many medicines in the United States, we need to come up with solutions. Now, one solution is to use the heavy hand of tariffs to force that. And look, as a point of leverage for some of our largest companies, that may be a tool, but it doesn't work in our small and mid-sized companies, where our balance sheets and our business models don't support bricks and mortar building in the United States, no matter how technologically advanced it may be. We rely on a network of partners and contract manufacturers. So what are incentives? What are programs that can bring more manufacturing to those 70% of companies who make our medicines? So more of a carrot approach than a stick approach. Similarly, too, when we're thinking about affordability of medicines and how do we make sure affordability and access go hand in hand, we look at what's a complex system of middlemen, of PBMs and other business entities that just add to the expense of medicines. The United States is the only country where more than half of the price of medicines don't go to the inventors, don't go to the innovators. It gets lost in the system of middlemen. So let's tackle that. We could take prices down, I think, pretty dramatically by doing that. And then let's look at what are other real barriers to access. Medical insurance that oftentimes has gotten out of control, where an insurance company has to authorize the prescription after a physician writes it, or requires you to try an older, less effective medicine first. So let's reform that system, and let's look in the mirror and look at our industry. Are there any of our business practices that have led to any of the barriers? Can we take on out-of-pocket costs? If we do that, we will remain the dominant engine of growth and innovation in biotechnology for the next half century. China will continue its research. We have the lead. We need to maintain and advance that lead, because at the end of the day, we care about biotechnology for our ability to make newer and better medicines as an engine of economic growth and for our national security. Biotech dominance is national security.
That's an inspiring and an important message, the combination of both the policy opportunities and, of course, the personal ways in which this innovation matters to all of us.
It's important to everybody. Thank you all for being here.
Yes.
Thanks. I see a bunch of zeros on the clock. So
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for adding
That
this
was great. Thank you
perspective
all.
And for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.
Welcoming back, Courtney Brown.
All right, thank you to Allison. We're gonna get right to our next guest. We have a trailblazer in the world of biotechnology and development. Please give a warm welcome, as warm as you gave me, to the flagship pioneering founder and CEO, and he also co-founded Moderna, Noubar Afeyan. Please. All right.
Morning.
Good morning. Happy almost Friday. So
Every day is almost Friday.
Okay, you see this optimism? We're gonna get to some things in this interview that show we're not so optimistic all the time necessarily. So just let's set the stage. You helped build, I think, what you can call one of the most consequential biotech companies of our time. You have been a very forceful voice in America, warning about the risk of dismantling some of the conditions that made Moderna possible. So we're really excited to have you today. And I get to make my high school English teacher proud because we get to quote Charles Dickens. I'm quoting you, quoting Charles Dickens. In your annual letter, you said, this is the best of times and it's the worst of times. So which side is winning right now? And please tell us what you meant by that.
Sure. Well, the letter that you're referring to is an annual letter in which I lay out the fact that in the 39 years I've been involved in this industry and starting companies, the scientific progress, the technology is really beyond comparison as to the rate of improvement and increase. And
that's the best of times.
That's the best of times. And in the letter I describe that this is nothing short of a whole bunch of miracles. If you view miracles as things that we don't understand that suddenly can be done and we didn't expect, this is an industry of miracles for patients and for everybody involved. At the same time, we've been taking for granted the fact that all this, it follows a kind of a value chain that starts from basic research and with a lot of patience and a lot of failure, ultimately comes up with things that are safe and efficacious for patients, huge unmet needs. And yet the underlying science has been massively questioned by policymakers. There's a kind of this reverberation that the notion that science advances based on debate, based on facts, has been under unprecedented attack. I've not seen it in my whole career. So I just laid the case that it's the worst of times if we undermine what drives this effort. Of course, there's other ways it can be undermined: capital availability, regulation, competition that's not fair, all these things. So it's best of times, worst of times means that I think there's much more we can do in the short term, and it may be much harder to do it also in the short term.
So are you, because you lay those things out almost as if they're on an even field, but are you more optimistic right now or more pessimistic given the conditions that you've described?
So I want to, sorry for giving you a little bit more complicated answer, but I've for 30 years espoused the notion that if you're going to do things that have not been done before, the right mindset is what I call paranoid optimism. And the key to paranoid optimism is that you have to be optimistic to do things that even you don't believe can be done initially. You have to be paranoid not to actually believe yourself too much. And that toggling between the two is the state you want to be in. Why I say that in response to your question is that I've come to learn that the more optimistic you want to be, or you have to be, the more paranoid you should be, as opposed to lowering your paranoia to increase your optimism. Our intuition tells us less this, more that. But actually it turns out that if you're more this and more that, you can keep it safe. Whereas if you just get optimistic because you're desperate and you need something, so you kind of hope it can happen, you make a lot of mistakes. So I value people who toggle their optimism and paranoia in complete balance. That's why I'm saying I am very optimistic, therefore I'm also very paranoid, and I point out exactly what could take the whole thing down.
Okay, so Noubar, you're giving us some life lessons here as well. Seems like a lesson we can apply outside of biotech, right? So Moderna spent like a decade building mRNA and the technology along with that before it like really mattered when the pandemic hit. How do you think about that story in the context of how innovation actually works? Because it was a slow coming, and then it was like, boom, it really mattered. We really needed this technology.
Well, so two quick answers to that. One, I think with or without the pandemic, mRNA would be in humans, in patients, doing its thing, hopefully pretty soon in the cancer field as well. And so the pandemic actually, I think, made it more visible to people outside than the work that was happening. But if you go back, the field of mRNA research goes back certainly 50 years plus. Some of the early breakthroughs that Phil Sharp and others made to understand how even our natural mRNA works, all the way to the late 2009, 2010 timeframe where we entered, and it was completely believed in academia and in other funding sources that you cannot make a therapeutic out of it because it has a very strong, causes a strong innate immune response in your body. Our teams had the notion, and it really was just a notion, that if we just did better job at chemically modifying these things and delivering them in a safe package, particularly to certain organs in the body, we may be able to overcome that. There was no proof of that, none. But had the early work not been done, had all the failures not happened, we wouldn't have known what to do next. And we did that, systematically for a decade, as you said. In 2019, late 2019, we had already tested mRNA vaccines in humans in 9 different viral infections. COVID was the 10th. People don't understand that. Because they heard it for the first time with COVID, they think it had never been tested. Now, it was not an approved vaccine, because if you know vaccine development, you realize the time frames it normally takes and the barrier you have to overcome, because you're supposed to give it to people that don't have any other condition. So that's a very long process. But we already had good data. So when COVID came, our ability to pivot to this whole new technology, and frankly, the exemplary partnership between the government, the research institutions, and Moderna in particular, I think was an incredible successful moment in biotechnology. It's a shame that it's kind of been in many ways kind of, I'd say, adulterated as a historical matter for lots of other reasons. But the reality is, if we could just do the same thing we did during Operation Warp Speed for many other diseases, because I don't know why you need a pandemic to treat something seriously with urgency and with collaboration, then I think we would have a very different discussion today. So that's the story of how the basic science, a lot of risk-taking, a lot of patience, a lot of collaboration can lead to something that's now been in billions of people in the planet. I'm not sure if there's more proteins that have gone into humans or more mRNA that's gone into humans to deliver a medical purpose. Both of them are the products of biotechnology, and I'm really proud of that.
When you think about innovation and you think about the Moderna vaccine, are you worried that it's going to take another big crisis to fix, kind of this undermined trust in the science that you referenced?
I think that the most kind of visible, let's say, visceral opposition that I've seen out there is that people seem to, because I've really tried to explore this, is that people felt that during the pandemic, policymakers overstepped their limits and provided directives that were not necessarily science-based as to what we were and were supposed to do, wear masks, don't wear masks, distance, don't distance, all that stuff. And I think as almost a reaction to all of that, there's a counter-reaction to, well, how do we know any of this even works? Which has now bled over to childhood vaccines, to things related, all sorts of fields. My point is, I would hope that science and talking about science and the fact that everything we're doing should adhere to a standard that is fact-based, not opinion-based, will cause this to reach an equilibrium. That's why I'm actually optimistic about our ability to rely on people's kind of seeking truths as opposed to reacting to another reaction to their reaction. That back and forth is really problematic for science, because the patients don't benefit from any of that.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about China. You, in your writing, have framed this biotech race as one that's between the US and China, which makes sense. Which is winning right now?
Well, I would say in a kind of, I like basketball, so in a basketball analogy, the game's not over, so winning right now means who's getting more points in the last 5, 10, 15 minutes, and the answer is for sure China. So in other words, whatever the gap was, the gap is closing. Maybe in some areas the gap has actually gone the other way. The game's not over. So the question is, what are we going to do during a timeout? And I think this is a period of a timeout. It's being discussed on the Hill. It's being discussed in lots of places. And look, I think that in China's way of doing economic development, technology development, is very much planful. It's somewhat long-term compared to what we can do. There is no plan here at a national level. And so the consequence of that is that you can think about where the vulnerabilities of the market may be, and you can deploy a lot of resource, particularly human capital, to a problem, and you can see some results. That's happening there now in spades, in particular, going after compounds that are better versions of the current wave of compounds that had become the darling of the US venture capital industry, which was investing in biotech companies that had a better product to what's already known. So not taking a lot of biology risk, not taking a lot of big breakthrough risks, but rather just another better compound, bispecifics for this, ADCs for that. Well, they looked at that and said, remind me again why we can't do that and do it better. And so they came in with a lot of resources, plus a very strong experience in optimization, engineering, and lots of iteration, which is what you need in that space. Regulation that allowed them to get human data substantially faster than what you can do here. And so we're playing catch up there, and the FDA is fortunately looking at all that and trying to advance some changes. So the fact is that as a result, the US pharma industry has in many ways shifted its attention away from some of the business development deals used to happen here and looking for assets for the benefit of patients, as was asked earlier about Parkinson's. Why not? I don't think you can fault that. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Now, if we said our lead is impenetrable, we're going to win anyway because we're predestined to win, that's an approach during which you say, you know what, laissez-faire, this is all good. By the way, I'll add to that, there's a level of availability of data, patient-level data, collective data there that allows you to take advantage of AI that has many obstacles to doing so here. That's another disadvantage. So all of that to say, it's a competition, let's keep it fair, but I do think that it behooves the US to think of this as John said earlier, a national security matter. I do think that the reason the solutions to COVID came out of the US primarily, and I would even say, not to be controversial, almost exclusively, is because of the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent laying the foundation that we could react from. I don't think we're going to want to lose that if we face either man-made threat, which the odds of which are going up every day as the technology gets more and more accessible with AI and biology fusing somewhat, but as well natural threats. I'm not sure which will be worse in the future or more threatening. So I think we need to keep our guard up. I think we need to continue to excel. And by the way, I think the promise of cures for some of the diseases we've barely been treating is clearly there. You can see the path to there. People talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about cancer as a potentially controllable disease that we could live with, just like HIV had become. So I think so I see you see my comments, an optimism that is parallel to the paranoia, because without these things, I think we will lose our way.
So I want to ask you about capital. How do you convince the private sector to keep funding research right now, given that the environment, I think is fair to say, in Washington is a little bit more hostile than it was before? Why would they want to keep investing in research, knowing that the FDA might not approve?
So I think that the FDA might not have approved for a long time. It's not, their job is to do regulation, and I think they've done their job fairly well over decades that I've watched them. They've improved. If you said, could they have advanced faster? Sure, maybe. But I think that has not been kind of, to me, the biggest obstacle. This is an industry of uncertainties, more so than risks. People typically don't understand that. We take on a daily basis scientific uncertainty, technological uncertainty, product uncertainty, market uncertainty, competition uncertainty. These are economic uncertainty has been thrown to it since COVID in a big way, and regulatory uncertainty. So the question is, when does that in sum total become too much? And when do investors kind of say, you know what, I'd rather invest in AI, I'd rather invest in consumer goods, which has been happening in the last few years. Now, interestingly, in the last year, biotechnology, last year, the Biotech Index did exceptionally well. I think that's as a reaction. So these things kind of swing back and forth. If you said, why as an investor would you invest? It's because there's relatively few places that the success is measured in billions or tens of billions of dollars of value to a single product, let alone if you can come up with something you can get many products from. So Moderna's story was very much, we have 20 different programs in clinical development, having already addressed and approved multiple. So I think those kinds of stories are what long-term investors want to associate with. Short-term investors, I think to some extent, are a bit scrambling now because of this onslaught of Chinese assets coming in, because that field almost has become like a lottery. It's like, which number are you going to bet on? Which one's going to be the best? So I think their investors have always been reasonably cautious in the sense that if they think they have a slight advantage in some knowledge, I think that's going to continue. So long way of saying, I think the FDA's posture, which has been on some ways advancing more than I've seen in years, in other ways, some things that are not explicable, I think that'll sort out.
We're out of time, but I hope our fabulous event coordinators will allow me to ask you this question, because I think it's important. You are a very passionate immigrant, and I want to ask you, just because of some of the writings you've been doing, the conditions that made you so hungry to come to America. I mean, if you were, a young kid now, would you still want to come to America?
I think the advantage America has is that however challenging we make it, people still want to come here because the alternatives actually still have quite a distance to what the US is. We should not take that for granted. It's the 250th anniversary of this country. I am American by choice. I'm not American by birth. When you're something by choice, you have to think about it and say, do I want to devote myself to these ideals? A lot more than if you take the ideals just kind of for granted because you're born into them. So for me, it's even more urgent that some of the things that made this place great, and I'm not a politician, I'm not anything, but as a citizen, I can tell you that I've given lots of talks where I've told, including to people who are who are taking their oath of citizenship, the large groups in Boston, and I keep reminding them that if this was a country that had a land in it, Iceland, Finland, Switzerland, England, Ireland, this would be immigrant land. This would be immigrant land. There is nobody who lives here who's not an immigrant, some generations, including this generation away. And if we don't see that as the definition of being American, no offense to folks, I'm not talking about illegal immigration, I'm just saying that is the substrate, that is the regenerative, it's as though cells couldn't reproduce and divide and improve over time. That to me is the essence, and I think we have to have a measured approach to making people feel attracted. The best in the world, I was attracted to come to the US basically to go to MIT. Right? If MIT was in Switzerland, I don't know if I would have gone, in terms of an institution of that caliber. The people who want to excel and play at the highest level, it sounds very arrogant to say it, are drawn to this country. We've made it much harder for them. I can tell you some of the funding cuts in science. I'm involved in MIT's governance now. I see the biology department reduce its intake or consider major universities are not taking graduate students. What is that? And the answer is we've made both the funding and the way in difficult. So I think that we've got to take a breath and say on the 250th anniversary, what defines us? What do we want to protect? And how do we continue competing? And I think that making this place receptive for the best of the best that can help learn from each other's cultures and backgrounds. I don't know, it sounds romantic, sounds idealistic. It is why I came here. It is why every other immigrant comes here.
Maybe we can use some paranoid optimism on that front.
Sure.
All right. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
very much.
Noubar.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Axios healthcare policy reporter, Peter Sullivan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for being here. I'm Peter Sullivan, one of our healthcare policy reporters here at Axios. And we're really excited to have our final speaker, really a leader in Congress on biomedical research and innovation issues. She's the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee. So please join me in welcoming Colorado Congresswoman Diana DeGette.
Morning, Pete.
Hey, morning. Thanks so much
You bet.
For being here. So you've really been very active on biomedical research issues for a long time in Congress. Maybe let's start broadly and kind of take us back to how you got interested in these issues in the first place, whether it's when you got to Congress or even before that.
Well, when I was in my second term in Congress, well, first of all, I got on the Energy and Commerce Committee in my first term in Congress. And when I was in my second term, my daughter, Francesca, who was 4 years old, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was right about at that same time that President Bush tried to restrict ethical embryonic stem cell research, which was holding the possibility of cures for type 1 diabetes and many other things. So I got involved with Congressman Mike Castle, Republican from Delaware, in trying to expand stem cell research. And we ended up passing the bill twice through Congress, through Republican House and Senate. And then it was the first and second veto of George W. Bush. But then I worked with Barack Obama when he became president to put it into an executive order. And so that's how I got involved in it. But then I've stayed so committed to biomedical research because it impacts every family in America. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican or even an unaffiliated.
Right. So now in the present, I mean, what do you kind of think is the priorities in terms of what we've been talking about today, keeping the U.S. sort of at the forefront of biomedical research and innovation?
Well, I was really proud in 2016 to co-author and to pass 21st Century Cures with Congressman Fred Upton from Michigan. And this was really a broad, revolutionary restructuring of the way we do research at the NIH, and then the way we do drug and device approval at FDA. And when I heard your previous speakers talking about the pandemic, I was very proud because one of the provisions of that bill was the provision that allowed public-private partnerships and ultimately helped with Operation Warp Speed to develop the vaccine for COVID. And so I was working with Congressman Larry Bouchon, who just retired, on Cures 2.1. And we did a white paper now about 15 months ago. And again, trying to figure out ways where we can expedite, where we can use aggregated data, where we can use AI to help expedite clinical trials, but then also how we can afford to pay for these cures so that every American can get them. We did a white paper, and I've been waiting all this Congress for my Republican colleagues to step up and say, let's really seriously talk about how we can encourage biomedical research in this country. I too am concerned about China and their poaching of our scientists and the poaching of our scientists by other countries, but also their commitment to doing this work while the U.S. is having these really unnecessary debates about science.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's been a lot of turmoil in FDA, NIH. I know we've seen some canceled grants from NIH. There's been a lot of staff turnover at FDA. I mean, how much does that worry you about the impact on innovation? And is there a role, for Congress to be overseeing that?
Well, Congress should be overseeing that. And quietly, in some ways, Congress is overseeing that. The president's budget last year projected a 40% cut in NIH. And of course, the budget that we finally passed actually had a slight bump up, although if you look at the cost of living, it still was a reduction. Mm-hmm. This year, not learning from their mistakes, apparently, they've suggested a 10% cut in the NIH budget. And many of us would posit that since we're so close in so many cures with so much research, we should have a huge bump up in science. But also, as you alluded to, the cuts in grants that went to research universities and others have had a terrible chilling effect. One of the things we did in 21st Century Cures, we tried to bolster up efforts to support young scientists. Mm-hmm. And when you have these cuts to research universities, the first thing that goes away is research grants by new and innovative grants by young scientists. And that's what we're seeing right now in the Trump administration.
Yeah, and so on that front, I mean, you're on Energy and Commerce. Next week, you'll have Secretary Kennedy come testify. What do you want to ask him, or what do you think will be kind of the hot topics at that hearing?
There are many, many questions that we have to ask the Secretary. Overall, the question is, what is he going to do to right the ship that he and DOGE and the other groups have torn apart? How are we going to replace all of the senior staff that left, and the 11 positions that have not been filled? How are we going to find a CDC director so when we have our next pandemic, we can actually address it? And how are we going to return to science-based research? The mRNA discussion that was earlier today is a perfect example. This saved millions of lives. And now for us to just abandon that because of somebody's political views is outrageous. If he can't answer those questions, then my next question that I'm going to ask him is, when does he intend to resign?
Yeah, so let's go back to under the Biden administration to talk about another aspect of all this, which is access and the pricing. Democrats helped pass the IRA, which included Medicare drug price negotiation. How do you kind of think about that balance between helping people afford the drugs and then making sure we're still incentivizing innovation?
Well, so because of the way, in my opinion, because of the way the insurance structure has developed in this country for patients, there's an incentive throughout the system. I only have 10 minutes, so I won't go through my whole analysis.
It gets very complicated.
But there's an incentive for pushing up prices throughout the whole system, including prescription drugs. So one thing we have to look at making sure we're supporting innovation. That's critical, and it is not cheap to do biomedical research, and most of the studies fail. So you have to make sure that you're not hampering innovation. But at the same time, when you're discovering these new and exciting cures, you have to make sure that they're affordable and available, not just to the wealthy, but to everybody. And so that's the balance that we have. And in the IRA, it was sort of an experiment allowing negotiation for certain classes of drugs. And that is just beginning to go on board. But I think we should look much more broad. We need to look at a reform of the entire insurance system. But we also need to see how this negotiation is working to make sure that it increases affordability, especially for some of those widely available drugs that have been on the market for a while.
Yeah, and so if Democrats take back the majority, what do you see building on the IRA to add more drugs? Do you see maybe targeting some other parts of the system, as you talked about, in PBM's insurance system? What are the next steps?
One of the great frustrations I've had with this Congress, and this is data-driven, this is not just my opinion, it's been the least productive Congress, maybe in the history of the U.S. And we see this on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where we've barely been able to reauthorize programs that were already authorized. And so in the next Congress, I think what we will need to do is we're going to need to do a review of the whole system, and then a concerted effort to boost up research, to stabilize HHS, NIH, FDA, all the agencies. And then we need to get data, and we need to look at what we should do about prescription drug prices. This includes potential price negotiations, but it also includes looking at the PBM system and the whole ethos of our drug and healthcare pricing system.
The other piece you mentioned was 21st Century Cures, working on 2.1. Congressman Bouchon has now left Congress. What's kind of the next steps on that front? I mean, you mentioned are you hoping that Republicans will hold a hearing on that, or what's kind of the next step?
Well, I've been talking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about. I don't want to just have a fruitless effort, and I said to them, if you really want to try to make these changes that can help with cures, that can help patients, I'm ready to go. And so far, I haven't had much of a response. The House has been so chaotic. Well, all of Congress has been so chaotic in this Congress. I'm just ready to legislate, but I'm not seeing much of an appetite on the other side to do it.
The other piece, I mean, that you mentioned, we talked about with FDA, NIH, is just sort of the workforce. You mentioned sort of young scientists. I mean, going forward, how do you think sort of the workforce can be rebuilt? Maybe part of it is just stabilizing things and encouraging, excellent people to come be scientists, work in the government.
Well, we do need to stabilize the system, but then we need to make sure that we're working with our partners, both our partners in private industry and bio and so on, but also in the research universities to make sure that we're incentivizing grants for new researchers, like we did in Cures. We need to bring a lot of that back to attract those folks back to the system.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's actually all the time we have. But thanks so much for the conversation. And thanks again to our sponsor, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. One quick plug before we end. I'll be back with another Axios Live event in DC next week on access to specialty care. That's called Closing the Gap, about how cost pressures are affecting whether patients can actually get the treatments they need. So you can sign up online for that today. We'll hope you'll stick around. There's coffee and light bites back there and network. But thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.